The heat hit harder than expected. Ethan Cole stepped off the military transport plane into the dense, wet air of Mindanao. Jungle canopy stretched like a dark green ceiling in the distance. There was no fanfare, just the low hum of activity boots. On gravel, voices in Tagalog, and the occasional squawk of a radio. Before we get started, please like and subscribe, because there are things here that you need to know before anyone else. He adjusted the strap of his pack and took a deep breath. 22 years in uniform. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, even some black ops in places nobody talked about. He thought he'd seen every kind of soldier there was. And yet, there was something here unspoken, coiled in the silence, that he couldn't quite name. A lean Filipino man in camo walked toward him. Mid-30s, maybe? Calm eyes, no smile. "Master Sergeant Cole," the man asked. "That's me. I'm Lieutenant Morales. Welcome. You'll be with us for the next few weeks." Ethan nodded, extended a hand. Morales shook it briefly, then gestured toward a beat-up truck. "Let's go. Briefing's in 30 minutes. Hope you're not." 2. Attached to air conditioning. Kids waved from roadside huts. Soldiers rode in the back, laughing softly, weapons resting casually across their laps. Ethan noticed something odd. No complaints, no tension, just ... presence. The forward base was nothing like the ones in the Middle East. No heavy armor, no towers. A few huts, some tarp roofs, a radio shack. Morales led him to a shaded bench near the briefing area. "You'll be helping with tactics," Morales said. "Training joint patrols. But don't worry, we won't let you get bored." Ethan smirked. "Didn't fly across the Pacific to nap." Morales finally cracked a smile. "Good, because our boys already love you. They heard you brought peanut butter." A few minutes later, Ethan was introduced to the Unit Scout Rangers local infantry, a few reservists. He noted their gear, patched uniforms, mismatched rifles, taped-up boots. They didn't look elite, but they moved like a single organism, quiet, instinctive. That night, they gathered around a campfire. The jungle buzzed around them, thick with humidity. A young soldier named Private Ramirez passed around a pot of rice and dried fish. Another, Corporal Haim D. Cruz, offered Ethan a spoonful before serving himself. No one ate until everyone had a plate. "You guys always this polite?" Ethan joked. Ramirez grinned. "Only on Thursdays, sir." Instead, he found jokes, small prayers whispered before meals. A strange ease in their togetherness. Morales sat beside him, been through worse than most. Some of them grew up fighting not with rifles, but with hunger. Ethan looked around. The laughter, the food sharing, the silent rituals. It wasn't just camaraderie. It was survival turned into family. At dawn, they marched 12 hours through jungle, so thick it swallowed light. No breaks, no complaints. Sweat poured down Ethan's back as he followed their lead through flooded paths, mud up to his calves. Morales moved like a ghost ahead, machete slicing brush. Never once checking a map, they reached the edge of a ridge by late afternoon. Below, a makeshift enemy encampment, not well armed, but hostile. Intel suggested recent insurgent movement. Ethan scanned the area, noting elevation, visibility, escape routes. "What's the plan?" he asked. Morales handed him binoculars. "Observe tonight, move at dawn, standard sweep." Morales nodded. Except nothing here is standard. That evening, the mood shifted. Soldiers cleaned their weapons in silence. Some scribbled notes. One tied rosary beads to his rifle's sling. Ethan sat with them, watching. Ramirez approached and sat beside him. "Ever fought in a jungle, sir?" "Not like this," Ethan admitted. Ramirez pulled out a small photo of his family. "My father fought here. Before me, he said the trees. Remember everything, so be respectful." Ethan glanced at him. "And what happens if you're not?" Ramirez shrugged. "The jungle gets hungry." Ethan chuckled, but the kid didn't smile back. After dinner, Morales gave final orders. Ethan noticed how he never raised his voice. The unit moved with practiced unity, almost like dancers in rehearsal. Ethan had seen drill teams less synchronized, then something unexpected. A small boy, no older, than 7, emerged from the trees holding a folded piece of paper. One of the soldiers, Sergeant Abad, knelt down and sent him running back to Abod, unfolded the note, and passed it to Ethan. It was a drawing. To soldiers, one clearly American, one Filipino, stood under Ethan stared at it longer than he intended. Morales looked over his shoulder and said quietly, "The village up north. We patrol there. Sometimes we help with repairs." Morales looked him in the eye. "Only from the ones who know will show up." Later, in his tent, Ethan couldn't sleep. He turned the drawing over in his hands again and again. He thought of the laughter, the mud, the quiet resilience. They were nothing like his SEAL brothers or the British SAS, but somehow they were. More outside, someone was humming a lullaby in Tagalog. Ethan leaned back, eyes on the canvas ceiling, and whispered to no one, "This is not going to be what I expected." The first shot cracked through the air like a THUNDERCLAP. Ethan dropped instinctively, face pressed to the earth, his heart already racing. The jungle around them erupted. Somewhere to the left, a soldier shouted in Tagalog. Return fire flared from the right, and the calm rhythm of the previous days vanished in a breath. Contact. Left flank, 40 meters. Morales barked, "The unit." Spread like oil on water, every man moving with surgical speed. Ethan moved behind a tree trunk, scanning. He saw Ramirez hit the dirt a few yards ahead, rifle steady, eyes sharp. These men weren't scrambling, they were adapting. Then he heard it, a low groan. To his right, someone was down. Private LES. Navarro, just 19, clutched his side, blood seeping through his uniform where shrapnel had torn across his ribs. Ethan hesitated. He'd heard brave words in combat before, but there was no drama in this. No shouting, just pain and selflessness, quietly spoken between labored breaths. The medic gave Ethan a quick glance, then turned to another man lying motionless behind a fallen log. Navarro winced, his face pale, but didn't make a sound. His hand pressed against his own wound, steady, determined. Minutes passed like lifetimes. Return fire slowed. Morales signaled a controlled push forward. The insurgents faded into the trees, shadows disappearing into thicker cover. "Sorry, sir," he whispered to Ethan. "I slowed the team." Ethan blinked. "You took shrapnel to the ribs, and you're apologizing." "I didn't want to be a problem." Ethan couldn't answer. He just watched as the boy was lifted onto a stretcher and carried back toward base. Ethan asked, voice low. "One Kia Morales said, 2 injured." "Not bad considering the setup. They were waiting for us." Ethan nodded slowly, then looked back at where Navarro had been. He didn't even flinch. "They usually don't," Morales replied. "They're trained to think about the guy next to them first." Later that day, as the unit regrouped near the outskirts of a village, Ethan saw another soldier emerge from the trees. She moved fast, her steps calculated, eyes scanning terrain. Even as she adjusted her rifle, her fatigues were soaked, mud on her knees, one of the sharpest we've got. Ethan watched as she knelt beside a wounded man, whispered something in his ear, then stood and issued rapid instructions to a pair of soldiers who sprinted off without hesitation. She just came back from recon. Terrain's a nightmare to Clicks East. "She'll always move like she's got 5 lungs," Ethan muttered, watching her disappear again into the trees. Morales gave it. "She's brought more men back alive than anyone I've seen." They set up temporary shelter near the village. Locals brought small baskets of fruit and bottles of water, offerings of thanks, delivered quietly. Children peeked from behind doorways. A woman with a baby on her hip offered rice wrapped in banana leaves. Ethan tried to refuse, but Morales nudged him. "Take it," he said. "They don't offer out of excess. They offer out of gratitude." As dusk fell, Ethan found himself sitting near the edge of camp, the jungle at his back. Reyes approached, her sleeves rolled up, sweat and dirt streaked across her brow. "You're Cole, right?" she asked, squatting beside him and unscrewing her canteen. "That's me, you're Reyes. Guilty." They sat in silence for a few beats, listening to the distant chirps of night creatures. "I heard about Navarro," she said finally. "Kid's got heart." "More than most I've ever seen," Ethan replied. He could have gone into shock. Instead, he gave up medical attention to save someone else. "That's what we're trained to do," Reyes said, sipping water. "No one left behind, not on our watch. Training doesn't usually make people selfless. That's character." She looked at him then. Not challenging, just measuring. Character is shaped where options are limited. Some of these guys grew up with nothing. When that's your starting point, you don't need medals to feel valuable. You just need to matter to someone next to you. They were interrupted by Morales, who handed Reyes a folded map and murmured a few words in Tagalog. She nodded, stood, and gave Ethan a short wave. "Back to the grind," she said. "You'll see worse before it gets easier." As she walked off, Ethan realized something. In every other war zone he'd been in, there was always someone barking orders. Someone playing hero, someone marking their presence. Here, people just did what needed to be done, without noise, without ego. He went to check on Navarro before lights out. The young soldier lay on a makeshift cot under a tarp roof, bandaged but awake. "You rest?" Ethan said. "That's an order." Navarro gave a weak grin. "Yes, sir?" Then he hesitated. "Sir? Yeah, did I do okay today?" Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You did more than okay, Private. You showed me what being a soldier actually means." Navarro didn't reply. He just nodded, eyes glossy, and turned to sleep. Ethan stepped out into the night. Rain threatened in the distance, thunder rolling far off. The camp was quiet again, no boasts, no bragging, no complaints. He looked up at the low, cloud-choked sky. And for the first time in years, he felt small, not in a bad way, in a way that meant he was surrounded by something larger, something he still didn't fully understand, something forged in blood, mud, and silence. The rain came hard that morning, not a soft drizzle, but sheets of water, warm and relentless, turning every trail into a river. Ethan stood under a corrugated tin roof, arms crossed, watching as the wind bent the trees sideways. It was supposed to be a day off from patrols, but no one was resting in the middle of the storm. Corporal Haim D. Cruz laced up his weather-worn boots, pulled a thick rope around his waist, and walked toward the stranded supply truck without a word. The vehicle had been stuck on a dirt road since dawn, wheels buried to the axles in sludge, crates of food and medicine still inside. The road was too narrow for backup, and the river nearby had risen fast. Ethan followed, more out of curiosity than command. "Where's he going?" he asked Morales, who stood near the edge of camp with a radio under his poncho. "Alone," Morales shrugged. "He said he can manage." Ethan stared at the figure trudging through the storm. "He's got no backup. That truck's nearly half a click away." "He knows," Morales replied, "but the villagers need what's inside." It took Jaime over an hour to reach the truck. Waist deep in water, he tied the rope to its axle and began dragging one crate at a time back to dry land. Crate by crate, step by muddy step. No one ordered him to do it. He just did, because people were hungry. Ethan watched from the shelter, speechless. He could have waited. We could have figured something out. Morales looked sideways at him. "He told me once, when you grow up on the water, you learn not to wait when someone's drowning." By noon, Haim had moved 5 crates, soaked to the bone, fingers blistered and raw. When Ethan brought him a dry shirt and a cup of hot broth, the corporal only smiled. "Thank you, sir," he said gently, "but save that for someone else." That same afternoon, on the return from a routine perimeter check, a recruit collapsed. From heat stroke, the humidity hadn't let up, and even the veterans were feeling it. The soldier dropped to his knees mid-step and fell face-first into the mud. Without hesitation, Private Ramirez narrow-shouldered, barely 5'5" hoisted the man's rifle, slung his backpack across his chest, then crouched and lifted the unconscious recruit over his back. One step at a time, he began the long walk to camp, his boots slipping on the wet ground. Ethan tried to intervene. "Ramirez, wait, get help. We'll send a stretcher." But Ramirez didn't stop. "He's my team, sir. That's all. Fuss. No drama. Just motion." It took him nearly 40 minutes to reach the medical tent. When the collapsed recruit finally came to, the first thing he asked was, "Who carried me?" Ramirez, in the far corner, was cleaning his rifle. He didn't turn, didn't speak. "He's fine," Morales said, stepping beside Ethan. "That's just how he does things." Ethan exhaled. "You sure this isn't something you trained them for?" Morales shook his head. No training makes a man walk uphill with another man on his back for 2 kilometers in wet boots and a fever. That comes from something else. The weight of it all hit Ethan later that night when the generators buzzed to life and warm light filled the mess area. Soldiers chatted, joked, swapped stories over warm rice and adobo. No one talked about Haim's haul through the storm. No one praised Ramirez's strength. It wasn't modesty, it was culture. Here, the heroic was normal, expected not to be celebrated, just to be done. Ethan found himself sitting alone for a while, eating slowly, thinking too much. He thought of the men he had trained, the briefings he'd led, the medals he'd seen, handed out back home. In most units, bravery was followed by a write-up. Here, it passed in silence, witnessed only by those who were paying attention. Lieutenant Reyes approached and sat across from him with a plate in one hand and a notepad in the other. "You've been quiet," she said, "just watching you. Look like someone trying to figure out a puzzle." Ethan smirked. "I thought I came here to teach. Now I'm not so sure." Reyes shrugged. "Maybe you are, just not what you expected to teach." He studied her. She had dark rings under her eyes, probably hadn't slept in a day. Still sharp, still calm, still present. "You ever seen Ham stop working?" Ethan asked. "No," she replied. "But I've seen him go without eating for 3 days during the typhoon last year. He only took food when we made him." And Ramirez, Reyes smiled. "When he joined, we thought he wouldn't last a week. He looked like a stiff breeze could knock him over. But he carried a wounded sergeant out of a canyon 3 months in. No orders, no backup. Just tied the man to his back and climbed." Ethan leaned back, exhaling. "And no one ever talks about it." "Why would we?" she said. "It's not a story for the outside. It's just who they are." Ethan finished his meal in silence. Later, while walking back to his tent, he passed Haim scrubbing mud off his boots with an old toothbrush. Ramirez sat beside him, tightening the strap on his rucksack. No ceremony, no medals, just 2 men preparing to carry the weight again tomorrow. That night, Ethan wrote in his journal for the first time in months. The entry was short. "Today, I watched men do more than I thought possible. Not because they were ordered, because they refused to let someone else bear the weight alone." He closed the notebook, set it aside, and turned off the light for the first time in a long time. Ethan Cole didn't feel like the most experienced man in the room. He felt like a student. The jungle at night was a different animal. Sound carried farther. Shadows deepened. Even the air changed heavier, thicker, like it clung to skin on purpose. Ethan stood at the rear of the patrol line, his boots already soaked through, rifle resting tight against his chest. Ahead of him, the soldiers moved in silence, only the soft squish of their steps against wet leaves marking their passage. At the front, Second Lieutenant Morales walked with quiet authority, his silhouette framed in the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the canopy. He wasn't barking commands, he didn't need to. A nod here, a flick of the hand, their Morales guided them like a conductor directing a silent orchestra. They were headed toward a remote checkpoint near the river bend. Intel had flagged movement. There possibly insurgents scouting routes in the dark. Nothing confirmed, but no one was taking chances. Ethan moved in rhythm with the others, his steps aligning almost unconsciously. The formation didn't feel military in the traditional sense. It felt like ritual, coordinated, reverent. Each soldier moved, not because he was told, but because he knew exactly what the next man needed from him. Up ahead, the line paused at a narrow crossing. A young recruit probably knew, barely past 80, and stood frozen, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted the sling on his weapon. His breath came too fast. His eyes darted. Ethan was about to whisper something when Sergeant Victor Abad stepped beside the boy. Older, broad-shouldered, with streaks of silver in his hair, Abad didn't say much, just placed one firm hand on the recruit's shoulder, leaned in close, and spoke softly in Tagalog. Whatever he said, it worked. The boy steadied his grip, nodded, and stepped forward across the creek without looking back. Ethan leaned toward Morales. "What did Abad say?" Morales smiled without looking. He told him the jungle only bites if it knows you're scared. The patrol moved on. They came to a slope where moss-covered rocks threatened every step. One soldier paused at the base, took something from around his neck, a small rosary, and held it briefly to his lips. He whispered a prayer, eyes shut just long enough to be noticed. Then he opened them, pocketed the beads, and moved forward without hesitation. Ethan didn't ask. He didn't need to. They climbed single file, hands steady on vines and roots. No one slipped. No one complained. And when they reached the top, no one asked how far was left. This wasn't just discipline. It was something deeper, not just faith in a higher power, but in each other. A belief so ingrained, it didn't need to be spoken aloud. Midway through the patrol, the rain returned soft at first, then steady. It soaked their uniforms, ran down their faces, filled the crevices of the trail. Ethan wiped his brow, watching as Morales signaled for the unit to pause beneath a thick cluster of trees. They huddled together, silent. Ethan leaned against the trunk of a tree and whispered to Abad, who stood beside him, eyes alert but calm. "You ever get used to this?" Abad gave a half chuckle. "To the jungle? No, but you learn to respect it." Ethan nodded. "You all move like you've walked this path 1,000 times. We haven't," Abad said, "but we walk like we will again." "That's a move." When the rain eased, Morales gave the signal. They moved forward once more, deeper into the brush. An hour passed, maybe more. Ethan lost track of time. Watches didn't matter out here. Neither did distance. What mattered was momentum. The group's pace never faltered. Their spacing never broke. Even in darkness, even under the weight of gear and rain and silence, they moved like they were tethered together by something invisible. At one point, Morales stopped abruptly. He raised a fist and knelt. Everyone followed, no questions asked. They listened in the near-distance low murmurs, not their own. Morales pointed to Reyes and to others. They vanished into the trees without a sound. A few minutes passed, then a flash of light, 3 short bursts from Reyes' torch, the all clear. They regrouped and proceeded, now on heightened alert. Ethan's breath came heavier now, not from fear, but from awe. He had walked night patrols before, in cities, in deserts, in dead zones, but never like this. Never with a group that seemed less like a unit and more like a heartbeat. Unified, steady, relentless, they reached the checkpoint just before dawn. No hostiles. Tracks suggested the scouts had moved out hours earlier. Morales sent 2 men to sweep the area while the rest took position. Ethan sat on a fallen tree, pulling off one boot to shake out the water. Nearby, the young recruit from earlier, the one who'd frozen, sat quietly, staring into the trees. Abad crouched beside him again, this time offering a piece of dried mango in a canteen. The boy took it, said nothing. Morales joined Ethan, sitting down and exhaling deeply. "You good?" Morales asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, just taking it all in." "Night patrols are different," Morales said. "They test more than your stamina." "What do they test?" Morales looked out, into the gray morning light. "Your reasons?" Ethan didn't respond. He didn't have to. He understood. They returned to base under the soft glow of sunrise. No cheers, no high-fives. Just gear being cleaned, notes being logged, and boots lined up to dry. Another patrol. Down another silent victory. Ethan found his bunk and lay back, staring at the ceiling. He felt the weight of the night knot in his legs or back, but somewhere deeper he thought of the prayer at the creek, the calm in Morales' gestures, the steady hand on a young soldier's shoulder. There was no glory in what he'd seen, but there was grace. They were supposed to be running a drill. The plan was simple: simulate a flood rescue, test coordination under pressure, rehearse the movement of civilians from one area to another. Ethan had reviewed the checklist over breakfast rolls, response time, radio protocols. All neat, all theoretical. By noon, the clouds had already turned, heavy, dark, ominous. A local woman pointed to the sky and said, one word: bagu, typhoon. The first wave of wind hit before they finished setting up. Rain followed like buckets poured from the sky. Within 30 minutes, the dry ground was a swamp. Within an hour, the road to the village was gone, devoured by water and mud. What had started as a training exercise collapsed into something very real, very fast. The radios buzzed in half sentences. Bridge down, power grids out. Children trapped, jeepney submerged. Northeast sector. Ethan looked to Morales. The lieutenant was already issuing orders in rapid Tagalog, steady and focused. The same tone he used for every patrol. No panic, just motion. They mobilized immediately. The soldiers broke into teams, equipment slung across their backs, ropes, stretchers, emergency packs. Reyes coordinated evac points. Abad checked on the med tent. Morales signaled for Ethan to follow him northeast. The rain was relentless, flattening trees, turning every path into a river. Ethan's boots disappeared underwater, each step pulling like quicksand. Then the scream came. A woman's voice, panicked, distant. Morales picked up speed, sloshing forward. They turned a corner and saw a yellow jeepney nearly submerged in the floodwaters, wedged against a collapsed tree. The windows were cracked. A child pounded against the glass from inside, water rising fast around her face. A dozen feet away, Sergeant Alano dropped his rifle, tore off his vest, and without a word, dove headfirst into the torrent. Alano Morales shouted, but the current had him. He surged forward with terrifying speed, kicking hard toward the vehicle. Ethan hesitated only a second, then plunged in behind him. The cold hit like a punch. The current slammed against his body, pulling him sideways. He tried to match Alano's trajectory, but every stroke cost him. Water rushed into his mouth. His legs hit something solid rock. Maybe, but he kept pushing forward. By the time he reached the jeepney, Alano had already smashed the side window with his elbow and pulled the crying girl into his arms. Her small fingers clutched at his collar, her sobs barely audible above the roar of the water. Ethan reached for them, but a wave spun him sideways. He lost his grip and went under. For one terrifying second, everything disappeared: light, sound, orientation. Then a hand yanked his arm. A lad with one arm around the girl and the other extended toward Ethan. The sergeant braced himself against the vehicle as water slammed them from every angle. Ethan coughed hard, grabbed the edge, and together they kicked back toward the muddy edge of the river. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't clean. It was survival, inch by inch. Reyes and two others appeared at the bank, rope in hand. They threw it once, missed, threw again. Alano caught it with one arm and wrapped it around the girl. "Pull her first," he yelled. They did. The child emerged from the flood, screaming and coughing, her arms flailing until they wrapped around one of the soldiers' necks. Alano turned back to Ethan. "Define good," Ethan muttered, spitting out water. They both laughed briefly before grabbing the rope and letting themselves be hauled in. The second they hit the mud, Alano collapsed onto his back, gasping. Ethan rolled onto his hands and knees, coughing hard, lungs burning. The girl stumbled toward Alano, clung to his soaked vest, and buried her face against his chest. "Salamat Kuja," she whispered. "Thank you." "Big brother." Ethan froze. That moment the mud, the rain, the girl's voice muffled against the uniform mitt, all hit him at once. Not just the heroism, the why behind it. He looked at Alano, who lay still, eyes closed, not basking in glory, but simply catching his breath. No orders had been given. No permission had been asked. The man had just moved, because someone needed saving. The rescue wasn't the story. The instinct was. Back at base, the generator failed. Lights flickered and died. Soldiers worked in the dark, guided by flashlights, matches, and pure coordination. Reyes managed to reroute the CUM system through a backup line. Abad organized supply, redistribution. Morales tracked incoming evacuees. No chaos, just action. Ethan sat by the fire, soaked to his bones, staring into the flickering light. The child was safe. The villagers were being accounted for. Injuries were being treated, and nobody was boasting. Nobody was waiting for medals. No one even brought up the river. Alano sat across from him, a towel around his shoulders. She didn't have time. "I couldn't even keep up with you. You could have died. We all could," Alano replied. "But only one of us was trapped." The fire crackled. Rain still tapped against the tin roof like distant gunfire. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He looked at the faces around him. Ramirez checking a map by flashlight, Reyes wiping blood from her temple, Morales eating quietly while scanning reports. They hadn't just done their jobs, they had become the storm's answer. He opened his notebook, hands trembling slightly. "Today I stopped comparing. Stopped trying to measure them by standards I once thought were universal. Today, I witnessed something sacred. Courage without the ceremony. Sacrifice without the spotlight. Loyalty without limits." He closed the book and looked up. Alano met his gaze, nodded once, and returned to his soup. Outside, the storm had begun to fade, but inside, clouds on the last morning, the kind of sunlight that cuts through days of storm, casting golden streaks across the wet earth. Instructions to a few soldiers prepping gear. Nearby, Reyes was helping a local family rebuild part of their roof with salvaged wood. Ramirez chased a chicken away from the Cums tent while laughing with 2 recruits. Alano sat alone, quietly sharpening a machete, lost in thought. There were no ceremonies planned, no parades, just packing quiet nods, and the understanding that what had happened here didn't need to be dressed. In speeches, that's when she approached. A girl, maybe 6 years old, barefoot, her dress patched in 3 places, walked toward Ethan with something clutched in her hands. Just looked up and held out a folded piece of paper. Ethan knelt. She placed the paper in his hand and smiled. Then ran back toward the cluster of huts where her mother waited with laundry in her arms. He opened it slowly, a crayon drawing. Rough but vibrant. 2 soldiers, one with brown skin and a red patch on his shoulder, the other with lighter skin and an American flag on his sleeve. They stood side by side beneath a bright sun and 3 stars, and beneath them, in shaky handwriting, "Thank you for not leaving." Ethan stared at it for a long time. The corners of the page were damp from her hands. The colors bled slightly where the paper had been folded too many times, but the message was clear and heavy. He didn't realize Reyes was standing behind him until she spoke. "She drew it yesterday," she said. "Watched you help carry her grandfather after the flash flood. Said she wanted to remember your face." Ethan swallowed hard. "She remembers all of us," Reyes nodded. "They always do." Later that afternoon, the unit gathered informally outside the barracks. Morales gave him a subtle nod. He stepped forward. "I've served with warriors all over the world," he began. "Men and women with medals I couldn't count, and kill counts I didn't want to know. I thought I understood what strength looked like." He paused, looking at each of them awed with his weathered face. Ramirez standing straight despite his size, Reyes calm and still, Morales watching with quiet pride. "But out here," Ethan continued, "in the mud and the rain, the silence and the fire, I saw something else. I saw strength that doesn't shout, courage that doesn't ask to be noticed. I saw what it means to belong to each other." He reached into his pocket and held up the drawing. "This, ... this is my medal. No cheers, ... just..." The sound of the wind moving through the trees and the smell of the earth drying under the sun. Ethan stepped back, and the group slowly dispersed. Some returned to their duties, some lingered, but no one spoke about the speech, because nothing else needed to be said. The transport arrived just before dusk. Ethan boarded last, his bag slung over one shoulder, boots still stained from the last. "Patrol." Morales shook his hand firmly. "Keep telling the truth about what you saw here," he said. "I will," Ethan replied. Reyes gave him a small smile and said, "Try not to get soft when you get back. I make no promises." As the engines roared and the plane lifted from the strip of beaten dirt, Ethan looked out the window one last time. The jungle stretched endlessly, green and gold in the fading light. He didn't feel like he was leaving a mission. He felt like he was leaving family back in the States. The world moved differently, smoother, cleaner, louder. But Ethan noticed the gaps, the silence between conversations, the weight behind shallow praise. And every time he stood before a new group of recruits, freshly buzzed and full of fire, he carried the drawing with him, folded, protected, untouched. He'd hold it up carefully and say the same thing every time. "You want to see what real courage looks like? Go meet a Filipino soldier." And in that moment, the room would go quiet, because the truth has a sound, and sometimes it starts with crayons, a storm, and a single whispered word. Thank you. If you have reached this, leave a like and subscribe, because stories like this, you should be the first to know.